Hello, this is Dr. Muriel Rand from New Jersey City University, and this video is on early childhood literacy lesson planning. I'm going to go through each step of the lesson plan and show you in detail how I created my exemplar lesson. The first thing you're going to put in is your lesson title. There's nothing magical about this, just add a descriptive title so you know what the lesson is about if you were to look for it later. This is really a practical issue so that when you're developing your own lessons later on, you can find them easily. Next, you're going to put in the subject area and the grade or age level. So for this lesson plan, it's literacy, and the subject area is informational text, and the grade level is kindergarten. Next, you're going to add your literacy learning standards. You'll notice that I used RI.K.7. RI stands for reading informational text. Make sure that you have the right standard. Remember that there's reading literature standard, that is when you are using a storybook, and there's reading informational text when you're using nonfiction. The K stands for kindergarten, so it should have the grade level indicator there. And 7 is the 7th standard in the reading informational text strand. If you don't have the grade level in your standard, in this code, it means you're using the wrong standard. It means you're using the anchor standard. So make sure if it says NJSLA, you've got the wrong one. You need to have the indicator, the grade level indicator, so it should have a grade level standard right there. Next is the student learning objective for literacy. Students will be able to draw something they learned from the book and label at least 2 things in their pictures. Now, what I'm looking for here is that your learning objective, first of all, matches the standard. You need to start with your standard. That's the first thing. When you're planning a lesson, you start with what the standard is, because that's what the state has determined we are supposed to be teaching. Then you develop a learning objective from that standard. Some people do that backwards, and that's not the best way to do lesson planning. You start with your standard, then come up with an objective that meets that standard. The other thing I'm looking for in your objective is that it is something that children can do. We don't say no or understand in standards because we can't see them know and we can't see them understand. So your objective has to be something that you can observe the students doing. So in this case, they are going to draw something that they learned from the book and label at least 2 things in their pictures. That's something I can see them do. The next thing you plan is the student assessment. And the student assessment goes along with your objective. So the idea behind an assessment is you've now decided that you're going to teach them how to draw a picture about a book and then label it. So how am I going to assess that? The first part of the assessment is the informal assessment. This is what happens throughout the lesson. And it's usually observing. Sometimes it might be a turn and talk, or sometimes you might do a little checklist. But this is an informal assessment that happens throughout the lesson. So here I'm going to observe students during the read aloud to see if they're able to discuss the photographs and use the term photograph. Based on what I observe, I'll either repeat or give more guidance as needed. I will observe during small group to see if they're able to draw something from the book, and I will assist them if necessary or reteach as needed. The point of informal assessments is to help you change your lesson midstream if it's not going well, or if you see the kids are not getting it, that you spend a little bit longer in one part, or you move on more quickly if they are getting it. So it's the type of assessment that helps you change your lesson right in the moment. The next part of the assessment is your formal assessment. And here there are 2 things that I want you to think about. First, what is the content you are looking for in your assessment? And this comes from your objectives. So if you'll remember, my objective said the students would be able to create an illustration of something they learned from the book and label at least 2 things in their illustration. What? Oh, look, that's exactly the same as my assessment. Because if you write your objective well, it should be the exact same thing that you put here under the content of your student assessment. I want to reiterate that. If you've written your objective properly, your objective is also your assessment, because obviously we want to assess what we had planned to teach. If your assessment is different than your objective, there's a major problem in the lesson, and it will not work well. The second part of this assessment is how do you actually collect the information, the data. So in this case, I am going to use a checklist that includes all the names of the students, and there'll be a column on my checklist for whether they were able to create an illustration of something from the book, and then another column on whether they were able to label their drawing. So there'll be two columns: were they able to create an illustration, and were they able to label their drawing. And then the third part is, how will I score or evaluate the assessment, and what is my quote-unquote passing score? My target score will be to have a check mark for drawing an illustration and creating two labels. So I expect that all of my students, if they've met my objective, will be able to create a drawing and create two labels. Okay, now the next section is the instructional and learning tasks. First, I'm going to start off with an anticipatory set. The anticipatory set is your hook. This is supposed to get them really excited and involved and want to participate in the lesson. And making your lesson engaging and exciting is the best form of classroom management, because then you'll get the kids to be able to do what you want them to do. So for my anticipatory set, I'm going to show them a video of bees swarming around a hive. I picked out a really good one. And then next, we're going to all pretend to be bees and swarm around the classroom. So first we're going to observe the video, and then we are going to act out that video swarming all around the classroom. And I know my kindergarten kids will love that. The next thing is the modeling and the direct teaching. This is my little mini lesson. And again, as you notice in our textbook, this should be about 5 to 8 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have them sit on the carpet, and I'm going to show them the cover of the book that I picked out, which is Bees. And I'm going to tell them that while I'm reading this book, I want them to notice the photographs in the book, because that's my objective, right? So this has to go along with my objective. I will explain that illustrations, which we've already learned about illustrations, are drawings, but this book is different because it has photographs, and I want them to notice the photographs as I read the book. And then I will read the book to the students, and I'm going to pause. I chose 4 of the illustrations. I chose them ahead of time, 4 of the photographs, and I'm going to pause and do a turn and talk on each of those photographs. And I'm going to ask the kids to just turn and talk to your partner about what you see in that picture. Next part of my lesson is guided practice. So we're going to dismiss the kids, and we're going to go to centers basically, and then I'm going to have one small group. So the other kids will be working at centers, and I will have one group of either 4 or 5 students with me at the kidney table, at the small group table. And I will have a chart paper, and I'm going to start out by drawing a picture of a bee on a flower, and I'm going to show them that picture from the book. There's a wonderful picture in the book of a flower with a bee sitting on it. He's got lots of pollen on his little legs. And I'm going to ask 2 of the children to help me decide what should I label. So I will ask them, look at my picture of the bee on the flower. What should I label in my picture? And those 2 students will give me the answer of what I should label, and then I'm going to choose the other 2 or 3 students. I'm going to give them a marker, and I'm going to have them come up and actually write on my chart paper the label for the drawing. And they can use invented spelling, draw it however they need to. And that will be the end of my guided practice. And then I'm going to move into independent practice. So next, the children will get a piece of paper of their own and a marker, or a set of markers, and they will draw their own picture of something from the book and label it. I will have the book there on the table so that they can refer back to the book, because I want them to get used to the idea that they can use the book when they're doing their activities. And at this point, of course, as you've noticed, the independent practice is also my assessment. Whoa, whoa, that's so exciting. Yes, that's the way a good lesson works. Your independent practice should be the exact same thing as your assessment. So I'm going to get out my checklist at this point, and I'm going to mark down who can do this and who can't. Vocabulary is the next section of my lesson plan, and the vocabulary words that I'm going to teach in this lesson are illustration, which we've introduced before, but I want to keep coming back to it because that's how we learn words. We can't just do them once. And then photograph and the word label. And all of these are what we call tier 2 words. If you'll notice in your book, they talked about the different tiers of vocabulary. These are words that kids are unlikely to use during their regular discussions, during their regular conversations with family or friends. But they are words that we use in lots of different subjects, not just literacy, right? There are illustrations in science. There are photographs in science. There are labels in social studies. There are labels in math. There are illustrations in math. So these are tier 2 vocabulary words that they're going to use in many different subjects. And then how will I get the students to use the vocabulary words during the lesson? One of the big mistakes teachers make is that they plan how they will use the words in the lesson, but they don't plan how the children will use the words in the lesson. So while reading this book, I'm going to point to the photograph and ask them, what is this? What do we call this when it's a picture that's real? And I'm going to have them do a choral response. We call that a photograph. And I might do that 3 or 4 times. And then during small group, I'll point to the labels they made and ask them, what do we call this? What are they? And then the students will respond with the words. I'm also going to be listening in to see if the students are using those words so that I can keep track of how much they're adapting this vocabulary. My modifications and accommodations are going to be for 2 of my English language learning students, and I'm going to let them write their words in Spanish. Right now, they're still using their home language, and it's important for them to learn the objectives, and the objectives of this lesson are to label. And it doesn't matter what language they're using them to label their illustrations, as long as they're able to label them. And then the second accommodation I'm going to make is that my student with an IEP will be able to dictate the words instead of writing them. And I will write the words for her because she has some physical motor problems. I am going to take dictation for her. And then finally, I'm going to list my instructional resources and materials. You notice that I've listed the book with the full citation. You can use APA style and put in the full citation for the book. Why is that important? Because 2 years from now, when you find this lesson plan again and you want to get that book and all you wrote down was B's, you're not going to remember what the book is. So you want to be able to get the book again. So make sure you have the complete reference in there. And if it's a website or anything, obviously put that in as well. You'll notice my video, I put in the URL as well as the title of the video. And then I'm also going to need drawing materials, chart paper, markers, and drawing paper. So that's it. That's how to do a well-crafted, well-thought-out lesson. I want to just reiterate a couple points. Remember that you start with your standard. Your objective needs to match the standard. Your assessment needs to match the objective. And the activity that you do needs to match your objective. And your independent practice needs to be the same as your assessment. If you get that right, you're going to do a terrific job and your kids are going to learn a lot.